China's maglev is basically impossible, and the reason is not what you think. Engineers launched a one-ton sled to 700 kilometers per hour in 2 seconds, nearly double a Formula One car's top speed before you could count to 3. And you heard that right. And the craziest part is not the speed it is. Why, the only maglev you can actually ride in China today is an airport shuttle that had to be slowed down because the vibration got too bad. That is the real story, and it starts with a promise. The promise that broke physics' heart. The idea behind maglev is almost embarrassingly simple. You take a train, you remove the wheels, you make it float. No contact, no friction, no wear. Just a vehicle gliding on a magnetic field at speeds no wheel-on-rail system can ever touch. It sounds like something you would design if someone locked you in a room and said, "Build the perfect train from scratch." And people have been saying that for 40 years. Germany said it first. In the 1980s, engineers at Tyson built the Transrapid, a low-slung, futuristic machine that hit over 400 kilometers per hour on a test track in Lower Saxony. Over 400 kilometers per hour on the ground. Faster than any helicopter ever built has flown. The world watched and thought, this is it. This is the future. Then nothing happened. For decades. Japan said it too. The SCMaglev set a world speed record of 603 kilometers per hour in 2015, faster than the standing world speed record for a conventional passenger train, which a modified TGV had pushed to 574. Engineers stood in hard hats, smiling for cameras, announcing that Tokyo to Osaka in 40 minutes was now inevitable. That line is still under construction, a decade behind schedule. Now, here is what most people never think about China said the same thing, louder than anyone. In 2021, CRRC, China's state-owned rail giant, unveiled the CR600, sleek white nose, magnetic levitation, 600 kilometers per hour. The kind of machine that makes your jaw drop on a screen. The headlines wrote themselves. China had done it again. There was a press conference, government officials, cameras pointed at an extraordinary-looking machine sitting on a short stretch of track at Tongji University in Shanghai. A 1.5-kilometer track. That is roughly the length of 15 football pitches placed end to end. Here is the detail that puts everything into perspective. The CRRC 600 has never attempted a sustained high-speed run, not once. The most photographed train of the future has never actually gone fast. That is not buried in an engineering report. It is just a fact the breathless headlines forgot to mention. But here is the thing. The CRRC 600 is not the real problem. It is a symptom. Because underneath that beautiful white shell is a levitation system with a flaw so fundamental that engineers have been fighting it for decades. And the faster you go, the worse it gets. The ground doesn't want to let go. To understand why China's maglev keeps hitting a wall, picture this. Hold a broom upside down on your palm, bristles pointing at the ceiling. Your job is to keep it balanced without letting it fall. You can do it, but only by making thousands of tiny corrections every second. Your hand never stops moving. The moment you stop correcting, it falls. That is electromagnetic suspension maglev, except the broom weighs 40 tons. And it is traveling at 600 kilometers per hour. China's EMS system, the technology inside the CRRC 600, works by using electromagnets underneath the train to pull upward toward a steel guideway above, attractive force. The train is not pushed away from the track. It is pulled toward it, from below, and held at exactly the right distance to float. That distance is 8 to 12 millimeters. Read that again slowly. 8 to 12 millimeters. That is roughly the thickness of the phone sitting in your pocket. The gap between a 40-ton train and the guideway above it is the width of a smartphone. And that gap must never change. Here is where it gets complicated. Attractive magnetic force is inherently unstable. If the gap gets slightly smaller, the magnetic pull gets stronger, which makes the gap smaller still, which makes the pull stronger again. And within milliseconds, the train slams into the guideway. If the gap gets slightly larger, the pull weakens, gravity takes over, and the train drops. There is no natural equilibrium, no position where the train simply floats and stays there. Every millisecond, a control system has to measure the gap and fire corrections to keep the train inside the zone. Not once per second, not 100 times per second, thousands of times per second. At low speeds, this is manageable. The Shanghai Transrapid, the airport shuttle you can actually ride today, does this well enough to function. But here is the brutal catch. As speed increases, the guideway's surface imperfections hit the train faster. Thermal expansion shifts the track geometry in real time. The control system has less time to react to each disturbance before the next one arrives. The faster you go, the harder the system has to work. And at 600 kilometers per hour, it is working at the absolute edge of what current technology can do. A paper published in the Journal of Railway Science and Technology in 2026 confirmed what engineers have known quietly for years. The high-speed instability problem in EMS systems is still far from solved. Not making progress. Not nearly solved. Far from solved. That single phrase, buried in an academic journal, is the most honest sentence written about China's Maglev ambitions in years. And most people will never read it. But even if you solve the instability, even if you crack the control system completely, there is a second problem waiting that makes this one look manageable. You can't just suck the air out. Here is something the press releases never mention. That test sled, the one-ton mass that hit 700 kilometers per hour in 2 seconds, did not do that in open air. It did it inside a low-pressure tube. A controlled environment where engineers had removed most of the atmosphere before the run began. Because at high speed, air is not backdrop. Air is a wall. Think about holding your hand out of a car window at 100 kilometers per hour. Now imagine doing that at 600. The force does not scale evenly, it scales with the square of velocity. Double your speed, and drag does not double. It quadruples. Triple it, and drag multiplies by 9. At 600 kilometers per hour, a Maglev train is fighting air resistance 36 times greater than the resistance a conventional high-speed train faces at 200 kilometers per hour, 36 times. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between pushing a door open and pushing a truck down a street. And inside a tunnel or enclosed guideway, it gets worse. The train does not just push through air, it compresses it. A pressure wave builds ahead of the nose. The faster the train goes, the harder that wave pushes back. The theoretical solution is elegant. Remove the air entirely, build a sealed tube, pump it to near vacuum. The aerodynamic drag disappears, and the speed ceiling rises toward 1,000 kilometers per hour. Here is what most people get wrong about that idea. A vacuum tube is not a tunnel. It is hundreds of kilometers of perfectly sealed, continuously monitored, airtight structure maintained at a pressure 100 times lower than the atmosphere outside. 100 times. That is closer to the surface of Mars than to a normal day outside your front door. Picture a drinking straw. Now stretch that straw from one end of a country to the other. A single pinhole anywhere along its length and the system starts to fail. One crack. One failed joint, one seal that shifts on a cold night. The pressure difference between inside and outside is so extreme that the tube does not slowly lose pressure, it fails fast. Engineers call it cascading depressurization, the kind of failure that does not give you a warning light. It gives you a catastrophe. Nobody has built vacuum tube infrastructure at this scale. The longest low-pressure Maglev tube ever tested sits at a few kilometers. A functioning intercity route would need hundreds. That gap is not an engineering refinement. It is an entirely different problem. And that is before you deal with what the train itself does to the air still left inside. Because a train moving at those speeds in a confined space is not just pushing a little air out of the way. It is creating something far more destructive, and that is the part nobody talks about. The speed that wants to kill you. At 300 kilometers per hour, the Shinkansen enters a tunnel in Japan. The train is moving fast enough that the air ahead of it has nowhere to escape. It compresses, builds. And when the train exits the other side, That compressed air expands so violently that people standing near the tunnel mouth feel a physical shockwave. Windows rattle, the ground trembles. Japan's engineers spent years redesigning the nose of their fastest trains specifically to manage this. The iconic elongated duckbill shape of the 500 series Shinkansen is not aesthetic. It is damage control. That happens at 300 kilometers per hour on a conventional rail line in open air. Now picture the same physics at 600, inside a tube. Think of a bicycle pump with your thumb pressed hard over the nozzle. Push the plunger and the air ahead has nowhere to go. It compresses, the pressure builds. Push hard enough and the plunger will not move at all, not because the mechanism broke, but because the air itself became a wall. A Maglev train in an enclosed guideway is the plunger. The air ahead of it is your thumb. And at 600 kilometers per hour, the train is not pushing air aside. It is compressing it so aggressively that the pressure wave ahead of the nose begins to behave like a solid object. Engineers call this the piston effect. Here is where the engineering gets genuinely frightening. That pressure wave does not just build ahead of the train and disappear. It travels at the speed of sound, roughly 1,200 kilometers per hour, bouncing off the ends of the tube, reflecting back, and colliding with the train from the front, while new waves build behind it. The tube fills with overlapping pressure events, each one interfering with the others. At a certain speed, those reflections arrive faster than the train can outrun them. The train is no longer pushing one wave ahead. It is being struck by multiple waves from different directions simultaneously. The tube structure experiences pressure spikes it was not designed to absorb. Joints flex, seals are tested, and the train's aerodynamic stability, already balanced on 8 to 12 millimeters of magnetic gap, is now being disturbed by pressure events hitting it from the front, the sides, and below all at once. The solution, in theory, is careful tube geometry, pressure relief valves, and an optimized train profile. Research teams have modeled this extensively. The models work. The models always work. What does not yet exist is a tube long enough, a train fast enough, and a test environment robust enough to validate any of it in the real world. But here is the thing. Imagine you solved every single one of these problems. The instability, the vacuum, the pressure waves, every last one. You would still be standing in front of the question that has quietly killed every serious Maglev project in history. Who is going to pay for this? The bill no government wants to read aloud. There is a train running in Shanghai right now. You can ride it today. It leaves from Pudong International Airport, covers 30 kilometers, and deposits you at a metro station on the edge of the city in just under 8 minutes. It is the only commercial Maglev line in China, possibly the most famous Maglev line on Earth. It has not turned a profit in over 20 years. That is not a rumor. That is the operating reality of the Shanghai Transrapid, a line that cost approximately 10 billion yuan to build. 10 billion yuan. At the time of construction, that was roughly the annual transport infrastructure budget for an entire Chinese province, for 30 kilometers of track that connects an airport to a metro stop. China's standard high-speed rail line, the kind linking Beijing to Shanghai, the kind hundreds of millions of people use every year, costs somewhere between 100 and 200 million yuan per kilometer, depending on terrain. The Shanghai Maglev cost roughly 300 million yuan per kilometer, between 1.5 and 3 times more expensive per kilometer, for a line that goes slower, carries fewer passengers, and plugs into nothing. Now here is the part that should make every infrastructure minister on Earth sit down slowly. The Shanghai Transrapid is the cheap version. It runs in open air, no tube, no vacuum, no pressure management, just a Maglev train on an elevated guideway. A full vacuum Maglev system, the kind needed to reach 600 kilometers per hour and beyond, adds an entirely different category of cost on top of that. Sealed tubes, built to near vacuum tolerances across hundreds of kilometers, active pressure monitoring at every joint, emergency depressurization systems at regular intervals. Evacuation infrastructure for a tube that passengers cannot simply walk out of. Here is the analogy that puts it in scale. Building a conventional rail line is like building a very long road. Building a Maglev guideway is like building a very long bridge. Building a vacuum Maglev tube is like building a very long submarine, one that has to work perfectly, under pressure, across geological terrain, that shifts and expands and contracts with every season, for decades. Nobody has accurately costed this at scale. Not because the numbers are secret, because every time someone looks hard enough, the numbers grow. And here is what makes this truly brutal. China already has an alternative, one that works, one that is largely paid for, one that moves more passengers, more efficiently, over greater distances than any Maglev system ever built or imagined. 45,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, enough track to circle the entire Earth and still have 5,000 kilometers left over. And it is quietly becoming the most serious obstacle Maglev has ever faced. China built its own biggest enemy. Imagine you are a city planner. Your city already has a high-speed rail connection. Trains run at 350 kilometers per hour. They leave from a station in the city center, connect to every major city in the country, and run dozens of times a day. Someone comes to you with a proposal. We will build you a Maglev line. It will go faster, 600 kilometers per hour, but it cannot connect to any existing rail infrastructure. Different technology. Incompatible systems. It needs its own stations, its own maintenance facilities, its own everything. And it will cost 3 times as much per kilometer as what you already have. What do you say? Most planners say no. And they are not wrong. This is the structural incompatibility problem that nobody in the Maglev industry advertises. Maglev is not a faster version of high-speed rail. It is a completely separate system that must be built from scratch, end to end, every single time. China's high-speed rail connects to everything, same gauge as the conventional network, city center stations already built and paid for. Passengers transfer between high-speed rail and local services without a second thought. The whole system integrates because it was designed to integrate. Maglev integrates with nothing. A Maglev train cannot run on a conventional rail line. Its stations must be purpose-built. Its power supply and control infrastructure are entirely separate. Every element of the system exists in isolation, connected to the rest of the transport network only at the door where passengers walk in and the door where they walk out. And here is what nobody wants to say out loud. That HSR network already exists. All 45,000 kilometers of it. More dedicated high-speed rail than the United States, Japan, and Germany have built combined. And it is not just competition for Maglev. It is the argument against Maglev. Every city already served by a 350 km/h rail link has a harder time justifying the cost of a separate, incompatible, unproven system that goes faster but connects to nothing anyone already has. China built itself into a corner. Its own success became its own obstacle. Now here is what makes this genuinely complicated. China knows all of this. Its engineers know it. Its economists know it. And China is investing in Maglev anyway. Not because the passenger economics make sense today, because the country that solves Maglev at scale does not just build a faster train. It writes the blueprint that every other nation will license, import, and pay for across the next century of global infrastructure. The same way Chinese high-speed rail exports have already reshaped negotiations across 3 continents. This is not a transport project. It is a bet on who controls the future of movement itself. But here is the honest question no government is asking loudly enough. Has anyone actually solved the underlying physics? Not in a press release, not on a 1.5-kilometer test track. Actually solved it at speed, at scale, in the real world? One country has come closer than anyone else, and what it found is not what China or anyone wanted to hear. Basically impossible isn't actually impossible. Japan solved the instability problem. That is not an opinion. That is an engineering fact. The SCMaglev, developed by JR Central over half a century of patient, unglamorous work, uses superconducting magnets and repulsive force. Instead of pulling the train upward toward a guideway it is always threatening to slam into, It pushes the train away from the walls on either side. Think of two fridge magnets oriented so they push apart rather than pull together. The physics are fundamentally different. The gap is not 8 to 12 millimeters held in place by a control system fighting itself every millisecond. It is 100 millimeters, roughly 8 times wider, maintained by a force that naturally stabilizes rather than naturally collapses. At 603 kilometers per hour, Japan's test train did not shimmy. It did not vibrate itself to pieces. It floated, stable and controlled, at a speed no human being had ever reached on land inside a passenger vehicle. The physics work. Japan proved it. The title of this video is basically impossible, not actually impossible, and that distinction matters. Here is what makes this genuinely hard to celebrate. Japan broke ground on the Chuo Shinkansen, its first commercial SCMaglev line between Tokyo and Nagoya in 2014. It was supposed to open in 2027. It is now projected to open no earlier than 2034, a decade behind schedule, on a 280-kilometer route. In the country that invented the bullet train and has spent longer building maglev infrastructure than any other nation on Earth. You heard that right. 50 years of development, a decade of active construction, 280 kilometers, still not open. And when it finally does open, if it holds to the revised schedule, it will consume roughly 4 times the energy of a conventional Shinkansen running the identical route, 4 times the electricity. To carry fewer passengers per train, at lower frequency, on infrastructure that cannot connect to a single existing rail line it runs alongside, Japan has produced something technically extraordinary and economically brutal in equal measure. The engineering is solved. The business case is not. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. What problem is maglev actually solving? At 350 kilometers per hour, China's HSR covers Beijing to Shanghai in 4.5 hours. A maglev running at 600 kilometers per hour covers the same route in roughly 2.5 hours. That is 2 hours saved. On a journey most business travelers already sleep through or skip entirely in favor of a 1-hour flight. 2 hours faster, at 3 times the construction cost, on infrastructure that plugs into nothing passengers already use, requiring a completely separate maintenance ecosystem, a separate ticketing integration, and a separate answer to the question of what happens when something goes wrong inside a sealed tube traveling at the speed of a fighter jet. The honest verdict is not that maglev has failed. It is that maglev keeps solving a problem that is slightly less urgent than the problem of building it. That is the gap that has swallowed 40 years of engineering brilliance, not a gap in the physics. A gap between what is technically possible and what the world is actually willing to pay for, plan around, and bet its infrastructure on. China will keep building. Japan will keep building. Because the country that finally closes that economic gap does not just win a transport contract. It controls the template for how human beings move across the surface of the Earth for the next 100 years. The same way Chinese high-speed rail exports have already rewritten infrastructure negotiations across Asia, Africa, and South America, maglev, solved at scale, is worth more than any single line it runs on. But breathless headlines and government press conferences and 1.5-kilometer test tracks are not the same thing as solved at scale. Right now, for China, for Japan, for everyone watching, a white train sit motionless on a short stretch of track at a university in Shanghai. The answer is the same. Not yet.